This video covers Section 7, Deploying Lambda Functions. To deploy a Lambda function with the Lambda API, command line tools, or the AWS SDKs, you must create a Lambda function deployment package. You also must create a deployment package if your function uses a compiled language or to add dependencies to your function. You can create two types of deployment packages, .zip archives or container images. If you use a .zip archive, choose a runtime when you use the Lambda console or a toolkit to create a function. When you author your function, Lambda will automatically create the .zip file of your code. You can also use a container image for your deployment package. It is possible to use familiar container tooling, workflows, or dependencies to build applications that are based on Lambda. You can use the console or integrated development environment, also called an IDE, to author Lambda functions. For .zip file deployment packages, you have three options for providing the deployment package to the Lambda service. The first is the Lambda console editor. If your code does not require custom libraries other than the AWS SDK, then you can edit your code inline through the console. The console compresses your code with the relevant configuration information into a deployment package that the Lambda service can run. This deployment choice is ideal for simple scenarios. The second option is to upload the deployment package directly from your IDE. In most scenarios where your code requires custom libraries, you can create your deployment package in your IDE. Then you can upload it through the Lambda console. The third option is to compress and upload to an S3 bucket and provide the S3 bucket, object key, and optional version for the object. Lambda will load your code directly from Amazon S3. The deployment packages have the following limits: 50 megabytes for compressed and direct upload, 250 megabytes for not compressed, including layers, 3 megabytes when using the console editor, and 512 kilobytes maximum for an individual file. When you deploy a container image, first deploy the image to the Amazon Elastic Container Registry Service, also known as Amazon ECR, by using the Docker push command. During the Lambda create or update process, the Lambda service pulls the image from Amazon ECR, optimizes the image for use, and deploys the image to the Lambda service. After this process, any other configuration processes are complete. The Lambda function is then in active status and ready to be invoked. Versions are immutable copies of the code and configuration of your Lambda function. Use versioning to publish one or more versions of your function. As a result, you can work with different variations of your Lambda function in your development workflow, such as development, beta, and production. When you create a Lambda function, only one version exists, the $latest version. You can refer to this function by using its Amazon resource name, or ARN. When you publish a new version, Lambda makes a snapshot copy of the $latest version to create the new one. The new version has a unique ARN that includes a new sequential version number. You can create aliases for your Lambda function. Conceptually, an alias is a pointer to a specific Lambda function version. Use the alias in the ARN to reference the Lambda function version that is currently associated with that alias. Using an alias makes it easy to promote or roll back versions without changing any code. Aliases abstract the need to know which version is being referenced. In this example, the test alias points to version 2 of the Lambda function. Suppose that Amazon S3 is the event source that invokes your Lambda function when new objects are created in a bucket. When S3 is your event source, you store the information for event source mapping in the configuration for bucket notifications. In that configuration, you can identify the Lambda function ARN that S3 can invoke. However, in this case, you must update the notification configuration. This is necessary so that S3 will invoke the correct version each time you publish a new version of your Lambda function. Instead of specifying the function ARN, you can specify an alias ARN in the notification configuration. For example, you can specify the prod alias ARN. As you promote new versions of your Lambda function into production, you only must update the prod alias to point to the latest stable version. You don't need to update the notification configuration in S3. With custom runtimes, you can use other languages in Lambda. The Lambda execution environment provides a runtime interface to get events and send responses. The bootstrap file is the runtime's entry point, and you can deploy a custom runtime next to your function code or in a layer. Even when using a standard runtime, when you build serverless applications, it's common to have code shared across Lambda functions. It can be custom code that more than one function uses, or a standard library that you add to simplify the implementation of your business logic. Previously, you needed to package and deploy the shared code together with all of the functions that used it. Now you can configure your Lambda function to include additional code and content as layers. A layer is a .zip archive that contains libraries, a custom runtime, or other dependencies. With layers, you can use libraries in your function without needing to include them in your deployment package. It's a best practice to have smaller deployment packages and to share common dependencies with layers. You can use layers to keep your deployment package small, which makes development easier. You can avoid errors that can occur when you install and package dependencies with your function code. For Node.js, Python, and Ruby functions, if you keep your deployment package under 3 megabytes, you can develop your function code in the Lambda console. A function can use up to 5 layers at a time. The total extracted size of the function at all layers cannot exceed the extracted deployment package size limit of 250 megabytes. The code snippets here illustrate how you would use the AWS CLI to deploy a function. These code snippets illustrate how you would update an existing function by using the AWS CLI. Here are the key takeaways for this section of the module. Lambda has built-in versioning so that you can create immutable versions of your code. You can use aliases to point at different versions of your Lambda function. Lambda provides popular runtimes, but you can create custom runtimes. Lambda layers are libraries of code that you create and which other Lambda functions can call. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.